Hello and welcome to the Intuition Conversations. I am so happy to be speaking to a friend and a colleague in the world of movement medicine, who is based in Nicaragua, which is where I met her a few years ago. I'm talking to Lucy Paget today. She is this gorgeous, light energy. You're a coach, you're a movement practitioner, you're an author, you're an osteopath, you are so many things. You're a mother, you're living in Nicaragua, but you are a citizen of the world. Your heart has been in many places, and your travels and all of your different modalities really show up in so many ways, in multiple ways and concurrent ways, in terms of what you are offering in the world these days. So I would love to hear from you. If you could tell us a bit about yourself, Lucy, and tell us a bit about your work in your own words and how you're showing up and what you're offering in the world today.
Thank you. That's such a lovely introduction. And I think, I have many titles, and I think it's really just, here I am at 43 on this path of becoming and becoming and becoming again. And each piece that comes through are all like little seeds that have been there since I was little, things that I've loved, that as I become, I think, more expressive of my deep desires and what feels authentic to me, then another thing arrives. So I started off, after my first degree in Canada, I didn't know what to do. It was an arts degree, and so I came back from Canada to London, which is where I'm originally from, and I became a yoga teacher. And when I was a yoga teacher, I was like, well, I don't just want to do that. What else am I going to do? And someone told me about osteopathy. I was like, oh, well, that sounds good enough. And so then, lo and behold, I became an osteopath. But while I was becoming an osteopath, I discovered this beautiful way of old-fashioned hands-on healing, which just felt like someone just opened this magical treasure chest. And all the things I'd really hoped were real when I was searching the garden for fairies and magic when I was little, I was like, wow, there is more. And so that really is how I've practiced for the last 15 or so years as an osteopath, in this very kind of more subtle way, which is so extraordinary, in this bridge between physical form that we can describe with anatomical words and neurological understanding, and that which is undescribable and so rich and potent. And then, and this all, I'm laying the groundwork, because this feeds into the discussion that we're having about intuition, so that our listeners kind of have a sense from the different places that I pull my awareness from. When I was little, I really wanted to be a writer, and I didn't do that because it didn't feel acceptable, or whatever the reasons were. But I always wanted to write, and from my 20s, I had this one story in my mind about this old Archangel Sariel who was going to come and live on a houseboat in the River Thames, and the story morphed and morphed and morphed. And then in my 30s, I got really tired. I was an osteopath full-time, treating so many people, and I had my kiddos, and I just needed a break, and I just wanted to write. I'd always wanted to write. And so I stopped everything and I started writing. And for the last 4 years now, I've been writing. And in the process of writing, really reconnected with my ability to use my imagination and what I'm going to call Imaginal Consciousness, which we'll talk a bit about. And intuition, and then have come back in this last year both to treating osteopathically and creating movement medicine work, which is really this drawing of imagination into and healing understanding into movement sequences that are rich with what I would kind of call life coaching, that comes from an intuitive place as well as a scientific place for women who want to get their energy and motivation back after injuries. There we go. That was a bit long-winded, but there we have it.
Beautiful. I love the seeds of remembering, and that, you know, from the balcony of 43 years, that you can look back and see how those seeds were sown, maybe even before you were born, but those seeds are in you, and your adult life has been a process of remembering and uncovering, combining and finding the magic in all of the places, like you said, that you hoped would be there as a child, and actually, showing to yourself and demonstrating that you are the magic. You can create that magic, and these are the modalities through which you're doing that currently in the world. And like a lot of the people I'm talking to in these conversations, it's, there's no one way that you're showing up. There are multiple ways that mirror and reflect each other, perhaps through the lens of an intuition. And I really want to hear more about imaginal consciousness. I really do. That sounds fascinating. And I love the combination of imagination and healing, creativity and magic, scientific, the physical and the unlimited. Like, I love all of that combination in the work that you're doing. So yeah, let's hear more about that as we go on. So in all of that, in your experience, in the work that you do, what does intuition mean to you? And could you describe it in a few sentences? Or, how does intuition work in you and through you?
Yeah. So I think there are different parts of intuition. I think it's a word that is too small for what happens. And how I understand it is I'm going to call it intuition and extra-tuition. And intuition for me is the feeling of something being a yes, a maybe, or a no. And I think it belongs in the world of the felt sense. And I think it belongs in the world of the felt sense and the nervous system's ability to know when something feels so that we can open to something. So that feeling, for example, of, really simple. Someone asks you now I'm going to give a real example. Yeah, I'll give a real example. Okay, so a year ago or so, before COVID, I was in Australia, and I really love flying trapeze. I am not a trapeze artist, but I just love flying trapeze as like a student. And there's just not that many places in the world where you can go and just pick up and do a flying trapeze class. But there was this place I was traveling in Australia, and they had this class, but to get to it was like really just like a bit of a trip. I had to borrow someone's car. I didn't know Melbourne well. I had to like go to this place I'd never been with people I'd never been to. So like there's this big part of me. It's like, no, it's too difficult. It's too difficult. No, I can't do that. I don't know. But then I was deciding whether to take the class, and my body was just, and my mind, it was just this feeling of expansion, a feeling of yes. And in that moment, I was wise enough to respond to the yes. And I did it, and I loved it. It was amazing. And I think, for example, you're going out for dinner with a friend, or you're invited to something, and is it a yes? Is your body giving you like like in spite of this and that, and maybe having to get a babysitter or some external situations, is it a feeling of expansiveness, or is it a feeling of restriction? And then there's probably in between. So just really learning to read your body, I think is one of the foundational ways in which we can become more receptive to our intuition. And I'm going to add one more piece there, which the reading of our bodies, and to feel into something being expansive or restrictive, it is simple, but it requires, for some of us, a reconnection to trusting our bodies, and doing some kind of like breathwork practice, movement practice, going for a walk, like actually giving ourselves a bit of time so that we're not living in a land of stress or a land where we are, when I say land, I mean just like kind of in our physiological state, a space where we are even a bit numbed out, frozen, brittle, which is what happens in the stress response. And so for me, it was really interesting actually looking at the world of stress, nervous system overwhelm, that in a kind of ordinary, everyday way that all of us experience, and learning how we can actually become living less in our adapted selves, where we've just like made ourselves do this and that and do this and that until we're at the point where we're not even in our bodies anymore, living authentically and coming back to ourselves. We need to do that to be able to access intuition. And luckily, intuition's pretty strong and it can kind of override a lot of that as well. So there's intuition. I'll pause there.
Yes. Yeah, that idea that some of the blockages to intuition are the busyness of life, the living in the shoulds and the responsibilities, and that place that takes us away from the connection with our hearts, with our guts, with our bodies, and just keeps us more cerebral and in our heads, like more thinking, less feeling. And for me, that blockage tends to live in, lives in my throat, it lives in my shoulders. And so I can always, and it lives in my neck. Hence, I spent, over an hour with an osteopath today, because I've been doing, not necessarily, literally like my neck hurting and reminding me that, hey, we're blocked up here. We've got to undo this blockage to get access to the intuition, to get access to that feeling, the not just that daily lived feeling of listening to the whispers and the yells that come from inside that says, this is who you are, and this is how, you want to live, and this is how you want to show up in the world. And, I love your examples of, of creating space for those moments of listening. So to come out of to work with your nervous system, to notice, are you in fight, flight, or freeze, as a result, is in response to what's happening around you. And then to notice that, and then also to give yourself the space, whether that's through, breath work, through movement, through there's lots of ways. And I'd love to hear about the ways that the practices that you access to get to your intuition, and some of the practices that you teach, and that you've create containers for other people to do that well-being, that recovery of themselves, in what you offer in the world. But before we do that, we're going to pause that question in terms of the practices, but I want to come back to extra tuition, please, and thank you.
Yes, please. Yeah, so extra tuition is just that unknowable. It is the land of mystery. It is kind of the magic that I think so many of us are like, is there magic? Is there magic in this world? Well, of course there is. Like, what happens when we die before we're born? So it is the reaching, and it's two ways, because we often think, for example, when we go out for a walk in nature that maybe we are connecting to the plants and the trees. Well, the other way around as well, what happens is it's in the other direction, the connection back to us. And so I think the extra tuition, which we can still call intuition, it's just that there is this part which I think is entirely like within us, this wisdom within us, and then there is our relational field between us and the natural world, and us and the greater mystery beyond the natural world, which who knows what that includes. And there is where guidance can come from, which is like, gosh, how do I know that? And I'm going to give a couple of examples, which then takes us into practices. So when I was back in my 30s and I was transitioning to writing my book, I was coming out of this treatment one day, and I got in my car, and as I was closing the car door, I heard the words so clearly, "You are done." And it just took me by surprise. And I was like, what, who, where, what am I done? You know, and immediately my mind was like, what have you done? What am I done? Well, tell me more. And it was just those 3 words. And I knew very clearly that I was done with living in Canada. I was done with the work I was doing. And I was also done with my marriage. Like there was many things that were done, but it was just these words that was so clear and loud. And then from going from that kind of outer manifestation, so to speak, of things that I already knew, it took time. You know, sometimes you'll get intuitive or extra intuitive guidance and knowings, and they really feel like knowings, you know, sometimes they come loud and clear and known, and sometimes they're more subtle, the whispers that are just the repetitive whispers, which I think is then this blend of more of the intuition, like, are you listening to yourself, are you listening to those whispers, or are things just having to be repeated over and over again? So the clarity of that, but it took time for things to manifest. You know, I had that clarity, which I already kind of knew. I knew. And then it took months for me to kind of get clear that, or not get clear, but, you know, the process of leaving Canada, selling a house, finding a school for my kids to go to, moving to Nicaragua with my husband, seeing if we could work through our relationship, then deciding that no, we were done. And, you know, there's a couple of years there in the mix until now. For a year and a half, I feel pretty clearly on the other side of living in Canada, other side of my marriage, really steeped in my writing. The writing, another example of extra tuition, is how I get a lot of the next pieces of my book. So my book is a fantasy novel, young adult fantasy novel with angelic creatures and talking animals, and, you know, every part of it is magical. There's my dark, terrible character is a king who's long dead, whose bones are still haunting the earth, and the sound of his bones are what keep the earth entrenched in his terrible enchantments. And the process of writing it, I'm still writing on my 5th draft, but the process of beginning to put the pieces in place, I was like, God, how do I get the next piece? Like, I don't know. I have no idea what's coming next. Like, this is exhausting, this process of writing a novel where every bit of it is completely unknown. And so what I learned to do was to lie down and meditate and allow the next piece to come to me. And I would lie down with the question of a character or a scene, and the piece would come. And it was so much better than what I could come up with in my thinking, rational mind. And it would come, and I'd be like, oh, well, of course the night sky cat comes from the night sky. Well, obviously she comes from the stars. Oh, and obviously she's a she. And then one of my other characters, a coyote. Well, of course he's the guardian of the forest. I'm so stupid that I didn't know that. You know, it was just like the clarity that the knowledge came through was so rich, and I'm just going to repeat, so much better than my rational mind. And I think when we learn, this is the world of imaginal consciousness. When we learn to access imaginal consciousness, is really just a bridge between our rational mind and our less rational mind, and into the land of extra tuition, through which we receive this beautiful guidance by who knows who or what.
The word that keeps coming to me is that source of unlimited potential that we tap into in ourselves, that also in being without limits also taps into the interconnectedness within which we reside. So that interconnectedness, whether it's to spirit, the divine, to the universe, to nature, a combination of all those things, however that shows up in your body, in your thoughts, in your voice, in your feeling, I think that's the source that we're drawing from, that unlimited potential within us and around us. And that, I see them as one thing. For me, that's an energetically one thing. And when we create those spaces to tap into the limitless nature around us, we begin to tap into the limitless nature within us. And that is, that's like when you say that it made so much sense. And yet, if you sat with your pen to paper or your fingers on the keyboard and you sat and you sat and you sat and you thought, like, the thought alone wouldn't have got you there. But it's that connection, I think, with the space, the spaciousness that you give yourself, that allows for the connection to intuition, that also inspires creativity. And I was wondering if you could talk about the relationship between your concept of imaginal consciousness alongside intuition and creativity, and how that all plays out for you.
Yes. Okay. And then there's one other thing that you just touched on, that makes me think about, it's really healing. It's really recharging when we open to our intuition. It's so restorative, because when we open to that, we're trusting ourselves, and we spend so much time doubting ourselves, or being told externally that we can't do something. So it's in itself, the practice of trusting the inner voice is deeply nourishing and deeply healing. And I would say, if you are exhausted and adrenally fatigued, it's part of the healing kit. It's really part of the healing kit. Okay, so imaginal consciousness is a term that I'm borrowing, and it's been used here and there for hundreds of years. And it's really cool, because the word, so again, kind of like intuition, as a word, we load many things into it, which maybe are limiting or not quite enough. And the word imagination kind of denotes a flight of fancy. It denotes a departure from reality. But is it? Is our imagination a departure from reality? Is it an escape? Because again, from the land of nervous system work, when we talk about dissociation and numbing out, which is an adaptive response that many of us do from stress or trauma, it's like we kind of leave our bodies. And imagination has the same kind of connotation of like having to leave ourselves. But what if it's not? What if it's actually, and what if we reframe it as a special type of consciousness that we can use as our bridge out to source? So from our source to that source, ultimately, if everything is one and that we're part of the greatness, and then we start to put a map into the greatness that there is. Well, part of that map can include imaginal consciousness as our way to access the greatness around us that is less knowable, because we don't have access to it through our ordinary senses. And I'm going to slip something else in here, which is this piece around senses. So with intuition and the types of knowings that each of us have, of course, there's going to be different ways that we access our intuition through different senses. And within each of us, an adeptness that may be there, and even maybe some training. So for example, me with osteopathy, my hands are really trained. And so I know when I put my hands on in a very subtle way how to feel for things that are a little bit like a sommelier reaching for flavors, that someone who's just taking a sip of wine without training would be like, whoa, God, how do you feel that? And so, and I can slip between what's real and what is inexplicable. And still, even to me, even though I have some tools with language and some training, I can't always describe. And in that experience too, when I'm doing a treatment, it is still the feeling of of using my imaginal consciousness to access the clouds, the sky above us. I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of, intuition being a number of different things, and that actually one of the ways that we can access intuition is by acquired knowledge and skills and training. So as you hone your skills of osteopathy, and as you also combine that with with wanting it to be in an innately intuitive practice, so tuning in to the connectedness to the person that you're working with and working on, the energies around them, that you're drawing on this acquired knowledge and this acquired practice, which is a skill, but also layered on to adding to that skill always by that listening, that intuitive tuning in about the wisdom that you have in your skill set, and then what's presented, the situation that's presenting, or the person or the energy that's presenting in front of you, and then combining that all into a treatment. And I just, I love the idea that we can, in the various work that we do, we can continue to train ourselves to work intuitively. And it's this cycle of working intuitively, which strengthens our intuition and strengthens our skills. And so I love that as a concept. And also picking up on the pathway of one of the benefits, or the beneficial pathway, let's say, of training your intuition and connecting with it, being an innately healing one, and of returning to trust, overcoming one of the barriers, which is a distrust in yourself, which is, can be external, it can be, messaging that we've internalized. And that, for me, the way I look at that process of nourishing, healing, recharging, trusting yourself and in your inner knowledge, and trusting those, that knowledge that's coming up for you, and experimenting with it, the imaginative and creative powers of it. For me, that's inherently empowering as well. And that shift towards, the more you trust yourself, the more you can stand in your own power as you move through life. You can stand with that trust, you can stand with that wisdom. And I would love to hear your thoughts about the connection of trusting and listening to yourself, to showing up in the world in ever clearer ways. And I guess for you, what have been the benefits in your life for that trusting, and for that reclamation of daily intuitive practice?
Yeah. So the trusting is like, it feels to me like a path of growth. And I am, month by month, year by year, feeling more happy in my own skin. And I've found that the trusting, sometimes it can be scary, because sometimes there's a calling to do things that are outside of my comfort zone, and yet there is a calling, and I have to find that part of me that is courageous to do the thing. I mean, so many things in the last couple of years which have been like taking off lids. So I think as we get older and grow up, and so much of like our 20s and 30s for many people is like, oh, I need to stop dreaming, so let's put another lid on that pot, and I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to do this thing. And it's like this process of putting on lids in it, and just trying to follow one thing, and trying to fit in and make enough money, and do our best to get by. But actually, it's beautiful to have a space in which to be safe, to take the lids off of things, to allow breath back into the corners of our being, the corners of places where we still have desires to explore something. And as the wind moves through us, as we allow this, this opening to move through us, as we allow ourselves to dream and desire and act on our desires, again, the recharging, restorative process happens. And it doesn't need to be fast, little by little. there is, I'm going to go to a really simple, kind of like a practice, because there is a simplicity in all this. It can feel sometimes like too much in some ways, like we're exploring such a rich, like incredibly rich topic, which takes us from like kind of the simple, like, oh, how do I know to trust myself, to the great mysteries around us. One of the simplest things we can do, and for those of you who are listening, I love listening to podcasts just when I'm driving. And sometimes in a podcast, I'll be like, well, now I'm going to do this meditation. I'm like, shit, I'm going to crash into the car in front of me if I'm meditating. But this, you can even do if you're driving. Just really thinking about the space around you. So as I am sitting here and as we're having this conversation, I notice my body in the space it's in. I notice beneath me the seat that my buttocks are on. I notice the space without being able to see. I notice the space behind me and the space above me, the space around me. And we start to create this sense of our relationship to the space around us. And simply by doing this, we access a more balanced nervous system state, because we come into our bodies and the parasympathetic and sympathetics can balance a little bit. And so as you just feel, you're just using your felt sense, feel your spine, feel the back of your body, and breathing into that and slowing the breath down a little bit so that the shoulders can relax, so that the belly can move a little bit more and the digestive system gets a nice massage from breathing properly. Now already we start to come into a state where we are open to our environment, we are open to the health within our beings, and we are open in a state more of balanced awareness. And this is the place to begin. This is the starting point in any treatment that I do. The only thing that actually matters is that I'm sitting giving someone a treatment from this state, and then everything just comes. That the wisdoms that the body holds, it comes through, and the questions maybe that we have in our mind about, what part of the story should I write, or should I go to the beach today, or should I drink a coffee or a cup of tea? It's like there's a clarity just there in that simple state of balanced awareness, balanced, spacious awareness, in which everything is accessible. The knowings, the intuition is accessible. So that's just a practice that I feel is so easy and is the place to just keep coming back to. And in a way, it can't be practiced too many times. Like I said, I've been doing my osteopathy work for 15 years, and it's the place in which I need to remember to bring myself back to, especially when I then get an idea. And this can be the same if I'm writing my book or giving a treatment or doing something else, but I get an idea and I get excited. I so easily come out of that place of balanced, spacious awareness. And so I need to remind myself to come back, give a bit of space, and then kind of the dance of going back and forth and coming back to that place.
Thank you so much for sharing that practice. I can, I just listening to you, I could begin just to feel myself coming into a calmer state and wanting to close my eyes and just, and to note the space around me. And that's such a beautiful and clear way to begin this practice. And one of the questions I ask everyone is like, if you're wherever you are on this journey, what kind of practices could you recommend to enhance that connection to intuition? And I love this as a practice that, anyone from someone who's like, I don't know, I'm living here up in my head and my head's just, my body's just supporting my head and I want to get into this place. Like they're right at the beginning of their intuitive, connective journey, and that they can begin to practice this. And like you said, someone who's been living intuitively for many decades, this is a practice that you come back to on a regular basis as well. I love that, the balanced, spacious awareness that takes us into a space from which we can begin to listen, we can begin to explore. And similarly, when I do coaching, when I teach a movement class, we start with grounding. We start with that spacious awareness. We start with where our bodies are. We start by inviting the different parts of our bodies in, and it's from that place of permission to be and to begin and to listen that, you know, that I invite people to move from, to be coached from, to write from, whatever we're doing together. So I love that. I love that as a practice, and that's gold dust right there. Thank you so much for sharing. And I just wanted to go back to this, you know, a phrase I feel like only a writer could share with us, you know, that intuition invites a safe space to take the lids off. That metaphor, that imagery of like, I can really relate to that particularly in my 20s of, you know, of wanting to, you know, fit myself into these boxes. And I tend to go for a box, but I love the idea of like a lid, like, no, put a lid on that dream, put a lid on that hope, like, you know, find a partner, go to grad school, get it, you know, do your career, buy a house, have some kids, get married, lid after lid after lid. And, you know, it's like, you know, I spent a lot of my 20s putting those lids on, and like the beginnings of my 30s. That's when the rumblings, almost like if you imagine like a pot on the stove and it's starting to overheat, and that lid is starting to rumble, it's starting to shake, it's starting to say, this doesn't fit. This doesn't fit anymore. The contents inside must come out. And that's, for me, like that boiling over, that lid almost shooting off and fracturing was, you know, there have been times in my life where I had to get to that point because I wasn't listening to the gentle simmering of the ideas underneath in the pot with the lid on top. And that led me to make lots of different decisions. It led me to walk away from a really important and really meaningful job. It led me to walk away from a marriage. It continues to lead me to make, you know, intuitive decisions. And what I try to do is create that balanced, spacious awareness on a regular basis, on a daily basis, so that my lid or multiple lids don't fly off and shatter across my kitchen, if we're continuing with that metaphor. So did you want to say something, Lucy?
Yes. So what about the little lids that have become so quiet and buried so far back in our boxes or pots of things we've put away? Those are the ones I think that are really beautiful, like the ones that, so for example, I've been singing a lot recently, and when I turned 40, my sister gave me a singing class for a birthday present because she knows I love singing. And I was like, oh, I don't have time for this. I'm so busy and important with all the things that I do. Not really. But anyhow, I finally took the singing class, and it was like, oh, I really do love this, and I've always loved this. And then I got back to playing piano, and I'd stopped playing piano when I was little because it was kind of boring to me. I was just playing sheet music. I wasn't singing. And I just since then, for the last 3 years, I've sung a lot, played piano a lot, and been singing kind of publicly as well, like at coffee shops and stuff recently. It's just been so lovely. And there's so many. One of the things I've struggled with, but I'm not struggling with anymore, is the feeling of being too many things, which is kind of where like we started with the conversation, you know, with like, oh, I'm an osteopath, I'm a writer, and blah, 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 mom. Like, we're all so many things. And I think we are this rich, rich tapestry. And all of us have like these curious desires and like colors woven into our beings that make us so unique and interesting, that we put the lids on because it's like, oh God, I can't do that too. I can't do that too. Like, you know, maybe you've always loved horses, but kind of just never taken the time to go learn to ride, or like, you know, what are those other things that are there? Things that you know of, and also things that you don't know of. And the big ones are obviously really important because they're like, you know, the explosions. The explosions happen when we really have been like following the wrong track, and we really need to sort ourselves out. So the explosions, thank God for the explosions, although they're a little bit like, wow, they wreak some havoc. Wouldn't it be nice if we could, I think this is where like having a life coach or having like a practice where you're relating with a group or an individual who is full of wisdom, like it's so smart to have some kind of wise support so that we're just not falling over the next rock in front of our faces on the path in front of us. And so that we can grow more and more, so that it's not just the explosions of lids popping off that are tended to, but the little quiet lids, which is really, that's where it's like, yes, you've got to get to the quiet lids. You've got to get to the quiet lids. And okay, one more example. When I treat people, they come to me with an explosion. Like, oh, I'm in so much pain. Like, please help me. Please help me. It's like, okay, well, sure, I'm going to help you. And ideally, please, will you keep coming back so that we can get to the underlying reason? And with the underlying reason is more expression of health. Like when we've done a few treatments and I have helped someone get rid of something, then we start to get into an expression of health in the body, which is an expression of vitality, an expression of aliveness. And that is what therapy should be about. It shouldn't be about just solving the catastrophes and coming back to normal. Normal is typically all of us adapted so far out of ourselves that we're not living very well. Normal should actually be this place where we feel really alive and energized and really answering the calls. That's not quite the right word, but answering, like being true to ourselves and having the energy to express our truth, and having relationships with people who allow us to express our truth and vice versa. Okay.
Oh, yes. I love that. Having relationships and coming into right relationship with your own energy, coming into right relationship with your own vitality. I love that. And I want to just take you back to something you said around the importance during our exploration of, we're going with this lid metaphor, the exploration of the lids. And I just keep thinking of, like, this is exposing, unfortunately, my, adoption of white middle-class British culture, but I just keep thinking of like Le Creuset lids, and then like the little tiny pots, like those little cute ones that you're like, oh, adorable. They're little tiny, just take off that lid. And they are adorable. And I, and so two things, like those little lids, that you remember. And for me, singing was one of them as well. I think it's Liz Gilbert, who has come up a lot in these conversations. I think is it in Big Magic that she says, taking yourself back to the things that made you happy when you were young. Oftentimes they will probably make you happy and give you joy when you're older. And I see that happening when I teach a choir class, for example. I watch how women experience for the first time the freedom in their bodies and remembering how much, without an alcoholic beverage in their hand, they really enjoy dancing. And it's that hearkening back to when they were young and they danced and moved their bodies without judgment. And so like that experience in a choir class, which often happens, is like lifting off one of those little lids of like, oh yeah, this feels so good. And in the same way, like, we are told multiple times, like, oh, if you're not a professional at this, or if you can't make a living from this, it's not worth doing, particularly around creative pursuits. But I think, intuition calls us and reminds us that we are inherently creative beings, and that we get lots of joy just from the process of drawing, of singing, of dancing, of horseback riding, of these hobbies that we kind of, when we're putting on all those lids, we like push to the side, that if we can't make money from them, if we can't, if they take up too much time or they cost too much money, they're not worth doing. And actually, those are the things that make our souls sing. And, and I've had so many experiences in my life. Like one of them, I talked to Jane Wilde Goldheart about her experiences of Sisters of the Wild. And one of the things that I didn't even remember I loved doing was weaving. And I remember, do you remember those, like the looms that you could get, and you'd stretch out the bands, and then you'd wait, like stretch out the fabric, and you make like pot holders out of them, or like the friendship bracelets that you tie into knots. I mean, I spent hours of my childhood doing that. And when I was at a gathering, a Sister of the Wild gathering, there was an invitation to go to a weaving workshop. And the act of creating, that pleasure in the process of creating, I was like, oh my goodness, yes, I love this. The feeling of, making something with my hands whilst also sitting around with other women. I remember sitting around with I grew up on a street with dozens and dozens of kids, and we would all just get together and during summer holidays especially, and we just craft and create and chat and talk nonsense and play. And I was like, oh God, I took so much joy. Some of my best childhood memories are like that. And like, as a 30 something and now a 42-year-old woman, like, I love that, and I love creating experiences for that. I want to ask you a question now around that sometimes in those explorations of the lids, that it's really important relating to others and seeking wise support. So I was wondering, who have been your teachers around intuition, and where have you sought support and gained knowledge and inspiration from, recently or over the years?
Yeah, my one of my first teachers was kind of gruff, not very like easy to talk to, but he pointed me in the right direction to go. And he was the first osteopath who did a treatment on me that was really kind of like, oh my God, what did you just access? That didn't feel normal. I had a session with him and I could see this crazy kind of searchlight, and like it was like a lighthouse beam. It was so bright and it was like swishing in front of me, and I had my eyes closed, and it was overwhelming because I'd never experienced anything like it. And I don't think I really have since then, but it was, and I asked him kind of what happened and where I could learn this stuff. And he pointed to where I needed to go to learn this stuff. And so he was one of those type of people that he actually just pointed the direction. That was really great. And then I've been really lucky to, have found, like, in the healing world, many books that explore consciousness, and within osteopathy, exploring cranial osteopathy and what that might be. More recently, in the last few years, I have been working with a life coach who just kind of guided me step by step through my change process from having the business, the osteopathic clinic in Canada, and being kind of an exhausted mom, and my own mother dying. And she guided me through this process of change to giving me within myself the feeling, helping me feel empowered to stop what I was doing, write my book, move country, separate from my husband, like all the things that I've done. And she did it in a way where she was teaching me all these tools to help me recognize when I was being authentically me and when I was just repeating back some kind of thing that I was parroting from someone who told me something that wasn't authentically me. So over and over again, teaching me to recognize that and helping me to feel in my own body some of that wisdom. And I've really been interested in shamanic work over the years. I love the ideas within shamanism, especially around soul retrieval, that as we grow up, we lose parts of ourselves, and that there are these little parts of us, these really important, essential parts of us that kind of separate off, and they're still around, but we've like put them away. We've tucked them away in a cupboard or in one of our little special places with the lids. And we've tucked them away because for some reason our being doesn't feel safe to hold that in a way where we can know it and express it. And this is such a lovely process of becoming. I think the intuitive path is a process of really becoming more fully you, and it's just joyful and delicious. And so exploring shamanic work has been really useful for me. And then the last piece actually is, and I'm sure there's many others that I'm just not thinking of, but the group that I have right now with the women I'm working with, the movement medicine group, I've got kind of a group of sort of like life coaching clients. We meet every month, a couple of times a month. And I've always been a bit suspicious of groups because I've been part of many groups that I've been bored by, where it's like, especially in kind of a sacred space, you show up and everyone's overly sacred, and there's like a lot of silent, meaningful pauses. And you're like, wait, is this a meaningful silent pause that I should be reverent about? When actually I'm kind of just bored. But I'd better be really silent and have like a very like peaceful demeanor, because really it'd be very unacceptable not to. I'm not very patient, so I don't like that. And I've been too many times in circles and gatherings where I have to like, hold my tongue a little bit too much. So I really love right now my group that I have. Maybe just because I'm the boss of the group, so I can direct it. But the sharing in that group is so rich. People come up with stuff that I'm like, oh my God, you're so brilliant. You're so brilliant. You're so brilliant. And also some of the interviews that I've been doing, because I also have interviewed you, lovely Meghan, where I'm like, oh my God, this woman's a genius. Like, that has been so enriching too. So community, the right kind of community, not the wrong kind of community, the right kind of community is like, you can fly with the right community.
I couldn't agree more. I love that. I think that, this kind of development, this process of becoming more fully you, as you've called it, it can sometimes feel a bit lonely, especially if you don't have the community around you of people who are exploring those different parts of themselves, pulling back the pieces of their soul that have splintered off. If you're doing that on your own, I think it feels harder, having it, being someone who has done it on my own without a friendship circle or a partner who's understood me and really gotten really just getting what I'm doing, and as opposed to constantly constantly trying to justify to other people, like, I'm doing this because I need to, or it feels good. Like, that takes up energy. And I'm also trying to justify this to myself half the time anyways, all of this work. But when you come into a community of people who are doing that exploration, when you're held in an intimate and sacred relationship where maybe they're not doing the same kind of work, like my current partner isn't necessarily someone I'd call like doing the spiritual development work that I'm doing, but he innately understands it and supports it. And then, the community, the collective community that I run, it's a very similar thing. Women are all at all different stages of their process of becoming more fully themselves, but the curiosity is there, and we share that desire along the way, and that can make such a fundamental difference, that community connection, when you're doing really deep work in and of yourself. And that idea of the sacred pause, I completely understand. As someone who talks fast and has to slow myself down frequently, I do try to like give enough space for everybody, but recently in my Irish Celtic shamanic training, it just makes me giggle. This really made me giggle. It made me laugh hysterically. We were exploring the East direction, and we were going on we were meeting this, like, the East direction is like about meeting the spirit of your death and all sorts of things. And the eagle is one of the animals that guides you as you explore, your relationship with the East. And we were called to go on an Imran, so a spiritual journey, which is often accompanied by drums. And so this Imran started, we were invited to then go on the exploration with the eagle. And I just was lying there meditating, being like, is the eagle, where's the eagle? Someone gonna tell me the eagle's coming? Is this a visual guided meditation? Like, what's happening? So I'm just sitting there being like, what am I I just could not drop into this, like normally I'm great at visualization. I could not drop in to this eagle space. And so I was just lying there for about 20 minutes, just being like, I'm not quite sure what's happening. And the more I was like, I don't know. And I didn't go into my intuition. I didn't trust my space. And the more that I didn't have any guidance around me except for a drum beat, I was like, I just found it hilarious that this just wasn't coming. And so when we went to go and share our experiences in small groups and breakout rooms, people were talking about these amazing flights that they took with their eagle. And I was like, nah, mate, nothing. Like, I mean, nothing at all. And, and I couldn't help but be just overwhelmed by the laughter and the ridiculous of like me waiting for someone to tell me my eagle was coming to take me on a journey when all I had to do was just let it go in my mind. And so like it's sometimes in those group spaces where I'm just like you just got to make it your own. And that's what I took from it. But but like being held in a community and holding a community is a beautiful space to be inspired. And I think there's also something particularly for women and people who identify as women, that where and I think men and everyone, gender non-binary folks, everybody needs to come on this journey if they want to indeed come on it. But when you see other people in community taking hold of the clarity around their lives, and when you see other people beginning to trust themselves, and you see other people lifting off those lids, there is something about that example and that permission, like, oh, if they do it,
Yes.
what's stopping me? Yeah. I can do it too. And I think that I love the idea of empowerment, of growth, of self-exploration, not being like a pie, but being like the sea, being like water, being like something that just moves through us, recycles. There's all sorts of stuff. I guess water's infinite, is finite as well. I'm not using a good example, but like it ain't pie is what I'm saying. It's not like if that person over there is trusting their intuition and empowering themselves, they're eating up all the intuitive pie and then I get less. It's not like that at all. That's not how I feel. It's actually like this ever recharging, flowing energy that we can all draw from. And the more people that are doing it, the more it adds into that the possibility, as opposed to taking it away. So maybe I'm not being clear enough, but like it's like you do it, I can do it too. There's room for us all in this exploration.
Or I think that's so important. There's room for us all in all the ways that we think, even from like we have a little business and we're worried there's not enough clients if someone else is doing the work. No, the way in which you do work is unique. And if you are doing it in the way that's true to you, there's enough. There is enough. There's one more piece that's just coming to mind that I think is important, which is that we are creatures of making meaning of things. And when intuition comes, especially because it's a little bit unknowable and unknown sometimes where it comes from, we try to make meaning of it. And sometimes we try to make meaning of it in a way that straps it down and is not realistic. And I think we just need to be open to knowing that we are creatures of making meaning, and that the meaning that we give to things may not actually be the meaning that is actually what it ends up being. And just to be flexible, if intuition comes, be flexible about what you've decided it means in your life, because it might mean something a little different. Your intended deep love, who you saw. So for example, there's this guy, I saw him when I was 16 and I knew that I knew him, and I'd never met him before. I was like, oh, and I was too young for understand. I don't even think I'd even heard of past lives, but I knew him in my soul. And I decided in that moment that he was the man that I was forever going to be in love with. And we dated on and off. He never fell back in love with me. Like I did not get the return of this like deep like knowing. And there's been so many times where I kind of chuckle now. I'm like, that was a little one-sided, that knowing. Like, what was that for? and but always like just like allow there to be an opening, and the pieces, they slowly unravel, they slowly come together, they make themselves known, and the direction in which you go maybe looks like this, but actually then becomes a little bit like this. But as long as it comes with like a feeling of expansion, a feeling of safety, then all good, I say.
Expansion and safety. And I love that, like, let it open, let it continue to unfurl, keep
Yeah,
listening,
yeah,
keep
yeah.
listening. If it feels like light, keep letting the light in. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so I think we're going to leave it there for now. There's so much richness, and I feel like we need another conversation to unpick it even further. But my final question for you is, how can people connect with you, or what are the best ways for people to connect with you right now? So all of your, all of the ways to find you online are going to be available in the notes for this, but I want to ask you, what is the best way to connect with you and the essence of what you're offering in the world right now, Lucy?
I love working with people in small groups on an ongoing basis. And so I have this membership program where people can join me. And right now it's a little under $50 a month. And we meet and we have classes, and I create meditations every single month, and I create movement sequences every month, and I do wisdom interviews every single month. And we go through different themes. And really the ultimately the goal is what we're talking about in this conversation, is becoming more authentic and having the energy and health. My training and my experience is so steeped in the world of health and movement, and then through writing, this accessing of imagination, that it's what I offer women is a way of recovering their energy and feeling more alive in their beings as we recover from injuries, illness, and chronic stress through ways of moving that feel like moving steeped with life coaching. And so all my classes are online, and probably will continue to be so because I live in Central America, and a lot of my clients are in Europe and the United States. And so you can find me obviously on my website, which is lucypaget.com, and then through an email is a really nice way to connect. And I just love working with just small groups of cool, creative women who want to feel more alive, and are like, yeah, I wanna take the lids off. I want to take the lids off and recover, and not just get older and tireder.
I love your call out to those heartbeats, the women who want to work in community, to live more authentically, to have more energy, to reclaim their health as part of the recovery process from, unfortunately, living that sometimes we move away from. So yeah, I love that. Moving and life coaching together. You know how much I love movement and life coaching.
It's so beautiful. It's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, Lucy, I'm so grateful for your time. I've loved our conversation. There is so much wisdom backed up by your years of practice. And it is beautiful to speak with and to witness someone who lives as they practice and dances the concepts that you're putting out into the world. So thank you so much. And I'm sure we will speak again soon.
Yes, thank you, Megan.